Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat, and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Gerrit. We're here in front of a live studio audience. That was our seventh take. You guys did great.
Yeah.
It was really great.
The first three takes, they booed. And then after that, it was a hiss. But,
we're not getting out of here unless we cheers. Let's go. Let's get this.
We barred the doors.
Well, so we're very glad to have everybody here. This is a lot of fun. We're very excited about it. We did a whole kind of preamble before. It would have been great if we recorded any of it. We didn't. And so, Gerrit, let's just jump straight into the Phebe Draper Palmer Brown Google form.
Or the mailbag we have.
We do have a mailbag.
We have the physical mailbag.
Many of the questions, though, did come from the Google form of those that are in attendance. So we wanted to jump right in. We've joked several times that many of the spouses are here against their will. We do have some special seating for people that couldn't convince anyone to come with them because of how terrible it is.
No, like... Not everyone's spouse is willing to come.
Look, that's right. Steve's like, thanks for finding it out. Anyway, all right, we're just gonna get right in. And like we do, we don't mess around. We get right to the point. We're gonna jump straight in. Since my husband is taking Taisley's is a litner in Georgia, she was going to be coming in.
A listener
from Georgia.
Every time Richard says litner, he's mocking the fact that I failed in my ability to pronounce the word listener at one point on the podcast.
That's true. Anyway, so Taisley's son was coming home from a mission. She was going to come out from Georgia, but decided to stay and have her son come.
It was a pretty convenient excuse, honestly. I mean, we knew that some people would try to get out of buying the ticket when they realized that it wasn't a Smash Mouth concert. But
yes, rest in power. He passed away.
Exactly.
We lost.
That's why.
Okay, this is very good.
But anyway, we're happy to answer the question.
So this question comes from Dan, who is Taisley's brother-in-law, who didn't want to come.
Dan told us when he came in the door, in all fairness, I don't want to be here. I thought, this is weird. This is something I would never do. And I told him, this is something I don't want to do either. Thank you for coming.
Okay, so his question, is there a source besides Mormon's description in Words of Mormon stating that First Nephi through Omni were the last of the books in the Book of Mormon translated by Joseph Smith, then placed at the beginning by him? And so for the studio audience that's here, this is an audio medium, but we did poorly put together slides for you to be able to see. Here's what someone thought Mormon looked like. So for those, now there is something.
A photograph of Mormon being displayed right now.
That's right. Now,
found just weeks ago.
And now I don't know if anyone has ever noticed this before. And so if someone has already made this joke, I didn't find it. I did discover this for myself. So if you look here at what he's sitting on, it looks oddly familiar. It looks very, very much like the big cats that King Noah has.
The jaguars.
The jaguars that he has that were mentioned, obviously, in the Book of Mormon many times, as Abinadi is giving to him the Ten Commandments.
There is no better, big timing of someone than to not only say you're a false king, but also to kill his pet and to wear it.
That's right. You kill Abinadi, I'm coming for your cat.
Yeah. How are those jaguars looking now? I'm sitting on them.
That's right. That's right. That was 400 years later. And he's
Wow. I personally don't know how long jaguars live.
That's right. All right, Gerrit, to the question.
We're going to just answer it?
Yeah.
Okay. So in answer to the question of do we have a source that says that particularly, we don't. What we have is context clues and, of course, Doctrine and Covenants Section 10. Now, part of the problem with Doctrine and Covenants Section 10 is that we don't actually know exactly when it was received. In fact, if you read the Joseph Smith Papers write-up on it, we believe that part of it was actually received in 1828 and that the remainder of it was received in April of 1829. Now, that sounds a little bit weird probably to some people, especially people dragged here against their will who didn't want to come at all. But, their friends had extra tickets, right? They told you were going to a concert, and your friends are liars. I don't know what to tell you. Your friends are dishonest. But the reality is, we talked about it on the. I always say the reality is to the point where Taisley created
she has a shirt that says the reality is. Hold on, let me go back a slide. Again, this is an audio medium.
Yeah,
there you go. The reality is
nothing like being mocked publicly. But anyway, we tend to think of all of the sections of the Doctrine and Covenants as just just immediately coming from the hand of God, exactly in the format that they're in. But we've talked about before in the formation of the Doctrine and Covenants that some of these revelations are what we call composite revelations, where there were a couple of revelations that were received near one another that were similar, and that when they published them, they kind of merged them together and created their own. And this is what it seems to be is done with Doctrine and Covenants Section 10, that there's a portion that was received earlier, and then there's a later portion that was received in April. Now, if it's being received in April of 1829, that means that they are dealing with the fact that Oliver Cowdery's already there writing for Joseph. He's already there serving as a scribe, and they are burning through that translation. But we get some really good context clues about where they are at in the translation on the basis of what questions they're asking because of the translation. I've said this before on the podcast, but again, to angry spouses in the audience, if you think back to the first time you ever really read the Book of Mormon, and I mean really read it, not read it because you were forced to in seminary, but I mean like read it because you wanted to understand it. When you did that, as you went through it, there would be multiple times, or at least for me, I don't want to. You've never even read it. Well, I'm even looking at you. Yeah. Richard hasn't read it.
I'm getting to it.
Yeah. Right after he finishes his Atlantic Monthly or whatever.
Atlantic Monthly?
Yeah.
That's you.
What?
What are you talking about? Of all the things I could have read.
No, I know you.
Monthly.
This is where we should pause. But we're not going to. This is where we should pause, but we're not going to. But if you remember what it was like to read the Book of Mormon for the first time, and it made you cry. I know when I read it, I was a teenager. I was 15. I was reading it. I'd read it before, obviously. My parents were really good about having scripture study. And so every morning at 5 a.m., they forced us to get out of bed, and we hated the scriptures so much because of it. Thanks, Mom.
See, you have to pay for the subscription to the Atlantic Monthly.
Well,
There's no way you're going to do that.
If I look over again, he'll have already subscribed. But he'll have used all of your ticket funds to do it. As you go through it, the first time reading it seriously, though, what you find is that there's so many times that you stop and you say, wow, this is absolutely amazing. I didn't even realize that was in there. I mean, it kind of does that each time you read it, even now, right? And think about what it was like for Oliver and Joseph the first time they're translating through these pages. As words are appearing on the stones, the Urim and Thummim, as Joseph's dictating them off, it's the first time not only that they have read those words, that anyone since Mormon etched them in the gold had read them. And so for him, for both of them, it's a powerful experience. It's a powerful spiritual experience. So for Joseph and Oliver, as they are reading these words for the first time, as Oliver's writing them for the first time, these are questions that, or sometimes answers that they didn't even know existed. I remember having this feeling when I was reading in 2 Nephi chapter 2 on why there's suffering in the world. Now, I've since loved that chapter even more. I've studied all kinds of theology surrounding the idea of suffering in the world. But even as a 15-year-old, it struck me to read that for the first time, that there is this power in understanding why it is that there is a suffering in this world that God created. Well, Oliver and Joseph have this happen to them over and over and over again, and we actually can trace where they're at in the translation of the gold plates based upon the questions that they have. One of the first questions they have is over Alma going off and people not knowing whether or not he was buried up by the hand of the Lord. That triggers in them a question about whether or not John the Beloved had really lived. Because it's pretty ambiguous in the New Testament. Is John the Beloved still living? Or is it just Jesus saying to Peter, what is it to you if I say that he lives until I come again? I mean, how about Peter does Peter? Just let's dial Peter back.
It's a paraphrase.
Yeah.
It's a paraphrase of what was said.
Yeah. Jesus probably didn't say it that way.
Yeah. Let Peter do Peter. Yeah.
I don't know what the Hebrew equivalent is. But it would have been in Aramaic anyway. We find with that question they get Doctrine and Covenants section 7. They then get to the portion, and we know very well where they're at because Oliver Cowdery says it very specifically. They translate the portion where Jesus commands them to be baptized and gives the authority to baptize. So he not only tells them you have to be baptized to go to heaven, and whosoever believeth and is baptized shall be saved, and whosoever believeth not and is not baptized shall be damned. He then, in the next chapter, gives authority to people to baptize. So what do Oliver and Joseph say? Apparently, we better get baptized, which is a totally new concept to them. Remember, they live in this Protestant world where baptism is, of course, part of Christian culture, but the fundamental part of Protestantism is that there are no works that are necessary. None. You get baptized because Jesus told you to get baptized. You don't get baptized because you have to. You get baptized because you want to be obedient. You get baptized to show the world that you're a follower of Jesus. But you don't get baptized because you have to be baptized to be saved. So this is a new concept for them. And so, of course, they go and they ask. All the way down to when in 2 Nephi, when it discusses the fact there's going to be 3 witnesses of the plates, which is at the very tail end of translation that they have that question. They, again, as Joseph tells us in Joseph Smith history, that they translate that portion, and we actually made fun of it, I think maybe even this week, that they began to tease him, I think, in the premium.
I don't listen.
No, it was actually the free.
I don't know.
You have no idea.
No, I have no idea.
You were literally with me as we recorded.
I know. I'm sure, it sounds great.
Yeah. Well, we defined the word tease, that they began to tease him greatly, meaning, pester him basically. And that was because they had just translated that latter portion of 2 Nephi. So is there a place where Joseph says, oh yeah, this is exactly what we did? No. What you do have is Doctrine and Covenants section 10, which tells them exactly what they're supposed to do. That they are supposed to translate through the small plates of Nephi until they get to that which they have retained. So what they already have translated. And so that's why scholars treat it that way, because Joseph's responding to the text of the Book of Mormon with the questions that he has that lead to the revelations that we have in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Great question, Dan. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We know you didn't want to be here. Thank you for the question.
All right, so the next one, equally as serious. If Dr. Dirkmont and I started a death metal band, what historically inspired band name would he bring to the first practice?
This was easy. Because I've always wanted to have a metal band. And it would be called Sword of Damocles. Which we've mentioned before on the podcast, but this is the from Greek history. Well, the idea that there's a guy who talks to a tyrant who seems to have everything, all the money, all the food, whatever, and one of his servants desires, I wish I could be like you, king, and have everything that you have. And the king says, okay, sure, yeah, you can do it. But in order to be like me, you have to sit in this throne. And when you're in the throne, you can have all the money and food and whatever it is you want. But above him in the air, he ties by a single strand of horsehair a double-edged sword hanging right over his head, which could break at any moment. And the idea behind it is, the moral to the story, if there's any, is that with power comes the ability to lose it all, essentially.
Perfect for death metal. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Or you had another one as an option.
I thought this was yours.
Yeah. Well, this is so. I like the idea of Tetzel's pretzels. So Angie put this one together. You've seen some of the shirts. We love the idea. Now, Johann Tetzel really sparks much of the Protestant Reformation from Leo X. It's really more of like a scout fundraiser to remodel St. Peter's Basilica is the way that I view it. So, a person sitting in purgatory for a period of time, that you can purchase your way out of that by paying for
an indulgence.
The merit of Peter doing Peter or somebody else, another saint, that then can spring you in. And the couplet is something along the lines: every time a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. Being in sales, that's an impressive marketing strategy.
So Richard, I think, likes Johann Tetzel for the wrong reason.
So much.
Yeah.
He's such an effective salesman.
And he was so effective that he caused the Reformation.
For money. Yeah, it's great. Anyway.
He wouldn't, let's be kind to the Catholics in the audience.
Anyway, that's great. How many Catholics do we have? Okay. Hey, Karen. All right, perfect. We got one. Pope Francis is doing great stuff. All right, so next one. What are the podium's letters on the front of the podium?
On the font.
On the font of the podium.
Literally the only temple
that doesn't have a font.
Really? That's a litner right there. It is.
Yes. You know what? Yeah. On the podium fonts in the Kirtland Temple fur. All right, so what are they for? So for those of you, maybe you haven't gone to Kirtland. Maybe you have $2,000 burning a hole in your pocket.
Hey, you can talk to Steve. He went with us.
Steve, what'd you think?
It was fair to Midland, right?
That was worth double.
Oh! Actually, you're in luck, Steve.
Because we're prepared to charge you triple.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I have never, Steve. Yeah, you and I have never met before. You said that, correct? Well, so if you have been before, but the church recently took responsibility of one of these sites, we'd like to direct you to the Standard of Truth tour. Again, great question. Whoever asked this question on the podium that is related to this tour. So many people have asked us, they've said, so with the church taking responsibility of the Kirtland Temple, are you going to be doubling your price or tripling your price based on the situation? We already have appointments to go to these places. I don't mean to sound like my Jewish grandmother when I say that, but kind of. But no, we're not going to, not double, not triple.
Quintuple. Yeah.
So this is a friend of the show, Damien. This is how he paid for it. That's a wheelbarrow full of cash. So for $10,000, you too can go to see where they wrote the Star Spangled Banner and then the Kirtland Temple.
But if anyone, the Kirtland Temple font, which will be an amazing part of the trip. We show you things no one else is willing to show you. Mainly because they don't exist.
The Community of Christ doesn't want you to know about the font.
They do not. I think the question is about the abbreviations that are on the pulpits.
Oh, yeah, to the question. Yes, the tour.
This is me trying to get you back.
We'd love
on
to
track.
have you come.
Yeah.
Just think about this for a week.
Wait.
Or don't think about that.
You certainly aren't Johann Tetzel as a salesman. So on the pulpits, there's these abbreviations which are not naturally understood. They aren't the way that we would say it today, and so that's part of the reason why you see them and you're like, what is this? But on the east side of the tier, these are all the ones that are for the Aaronic priesthood. These are pulpits for the leadership of the Aaronic priesthood. Now, today there's like 475,000 deacons quorums. I have no idea how many deacons quorums there are. Okay,
We'll get our correct research.
Get our research stat on that. Where are you going to look that up? How many deacons quorums there are? Good luck.
I'm going to subreddit.
Yeah, it's subreddit. Yeah. Oh, look, you're on an anti-Mormon subreddit. I'm sure they know.
I'm going to leave that.
Yeah. He just puts his phone down and walks out. But in the early days of the church, there was just only the ones there in the stake of Zion. And so while you had people called to certain callings in different branches, you didn't have wards or anything like that. So and their designation of things is certainly different than it is for us. So you'd see BPA. That's the presiding bishop presiding Aaronic. So of the Aaronic priesthood. That's what the BPA. It sounds like it's something that you're not supposed to have in like plastics or something. Is that PAP, right? That's the presidency Aaronic priests, right? So again, we would not use the abbreviations that way. PTA, which all of you are avoiding a meeting of that tonight by being here. That's the presidency teachers Aaronic, right? So you can kind of see how they're doing it in this kind of the presiding deacons Aaronic. The next one is the PDA, which is obviously a different designation today. And then on the Melchizedek priesthood side, which was on the west side of those pulpits, the MPC is not NPC, but MPC with an M, is the Melchizedek Presiding Council, so or the first presidency is what that is. Then you have PMH, which is the Presiding Melchizedek High Priesthood. So that would have been in Kirtland. That would have been the High Council of the stake of Kirtland. Eventually, that's going to be the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. The Quorum of the 12 Apostles has already been called by 1835, by February of 1835, but they are the traveling High Council of the church at that point. Again, you only have one stake, okay? You just have the High Council at the seat of government, which is there in Kirtland, and then the apostles are called to be the High Council that is essentially the general authority of the church everywhere that isn't Kirtland, everywhere outside of the seat of government of the church. And so eventually that would come, if you were to build those same pulpits in Nauvoo, it would have been more for the Quorum of the 12 to sit in, or the presidency of the Quorum of the 12. MHP is the Melchizedek High Priesthood. So this would have been the equivalent of the High Priest Quorum. We don't have that anymore, right? And what's interesting is that, as I've said before in the podcast, in the early days of the church, they didn't have one either. In the early days of the church, they had elders with the high priesthood and elders without the high priesthood. And they they eventually are going to create a quorum.
You kind of have it with bishoprics and stake presidencies and stuff, but still, it's a lot smaller than it used to be.
Yeah.
So
you don't have the same.
By the way, so I have real quick some information here. Akron's beating Kent State 42-37. NC State's, it's just after tip, but NC State's up 10 over North Carolina.
You were supposed to be looking how many deacon quorums there are.
Brown beat Princeton. That's a surprise. I did not have that.
Yeah, that is a big win. That's a big win. And how did Iowa State fare against Houston?
I haven't checked that yet. But there are 31,330 congregations, but you're going to have some variation of that.
Some have two deacons quorums.
And some might not have a deacon's quorum at all because it's all congregations, so plus or minus 30,000.
See, he did both. I love the fact that Richard's versatile. He both looks it up and then also finds out what the scores are.
Iowa State really gave it to Houston, actually. 69-41. How about that?
So there,
gasps in the audience.
Only the people who had money on it, which they shouldn't, because of President Hinckley's talk.
2005 conference address in April about gambling. That's right. So if you've never attended before, as an example, you shouldn't gamble but I give a lot of gambling advice on the show. I give it 2 weeks after the event happened, and I'm almost always wrong.
Yeah. We've tried having him do it before the event. It just,
I got Kansas City. That was a win.
We both got Kansas City.
I had the Lions versus Kansas City in the Super Bowl.
You also said that the Lions weren't going to make the playoffs, which is a very odd.
I had them on the under. So what an under is.
Well, hopefully that answers that. What's our next question?
Next question. Very good, Gerrit. Okay, this is a Three Nephites question. These
are my favorite.
This comes to us all the way from Wendy in Australia, who is quickly becoming one of our favorite litners. She is very, very, she's wonderful. I can't see. Sorry, I apologize. This has happened very quickly.
Those of you who are in attendance can see Richard's failing eyesight.
Okay.
We'll talk to Steve about that later.
Yeah. Well, it gets better with age, right, Steve? Yep. All right. Always a fun day when I get to listen to you on the way to work and home again. Loved hearing about William Howe and Augustus from Willy Wonka. Now, we assume it's because of her Australian accent that when we said Wonka, she thought there was an R there. We assume. And we're back. That last commercial break was brought to you by Jersey Mike's. Jersey Mike's kind of tastes like Blimpie. Do you remember Blimpie? All right. I don't know.
Why are you calling for applause? You want to finish reading the email?
Willy Wonka. Not often that you hear those two in one sentence. Just for your edification, Aussie Rules Grand Final is held in last Saturday in September. We'll see your Collingwood prediction. See if your Collingwood prediction will come true. I predicted the Magpies would win the championship. I follow Aussie Rules football quite extensively. My honey would hope not. I did think of a good question as you discussed the possible. That's a little arrogant, Wendy, to think that you think that the question's good. We'll be the judge of that, Wendy. Just kidding. Sorry. I'm very sorry. I just got a text from my wife. I'm very sorry.
I didn't get one from Angie yet, so I'm okay.
I discussed the possible photo of George Washington at Valley Forge.
The photo?
I think it was. Not fully up on my American history. Names seem familiar to those that I've heard in the movie National Treasure. That's where a lot of my knowledge comes from.
First of all, Wendy, that's where most Americans' knowledge of American history comes from.
The Declaration of Independence.
We have a history teacher, a high school history teacher in the audience here tonight. He will tell you most of the knowledge comes from that.
My question is about urban legend stories of the Three Nephites. Are there any verified by historical documents? Wendy, that's a great question. Keep up the amazing work you do. Would love to attend your live session next time one in Melbourne. Cheers, Wendy.
Should we hold the next live event in Melbourne?
Yeah. Love to have you all there. That'd be great.
Yeah.
We'll have slightly lower quality treats, obviously.
Yeah. More koalas.
Yes.
More koalas.
So the three Nephite stories, Genrith, what do we know about
There's a lot of stories, obviously, but are there documents? Well, certainly there's documents where people believe that they've had a three Nephite encounter, or that they say, I don't know what happened. It just, someone showed up and, so I thought I would share one that I was working on actually for a different reason, not the three Nephite story, but I was working with a document earlier this last week that is from a journal from someone in 1881. And he has apparently asked his friend, so his name's Oliver Huntington. He's apparently asked his friend about some church history things because his friend was a member of the church in Nauvoo. And his friend is named Addison Everett. Addison Everett is his name. So Addison Everett writes a letter to him, and Huntington copies this into his journal. And there are several things that he says he's heard from these sources or that he was a part of. This is how a lot of three Nephite stories originate, honestly. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not true, but it certainly is a reminiscence back. He's going to be talking about having had a conversation with someone at least 40 years earlier. And however much you remember this podcast 40 years from now, because you certainly won't listen to it again, just from tonight, that's basically what you're dealing with. That doesn't mean that it's incorrect, but it also means you have to be a little bit careful with that source, as we talk about on the podcast. So he copies in part of this. I'm going to give you a bonus, though, because he tells two stories. And the first one's so good, and we've already talked about John the Beloved, that I thought, you know what? I'm going to tell this story, too. While the Camp of Zion, so Zion's Camp March is marching out, was on the way to Missouri in 1834, Joseph was some way out ahead of the company. And one day there was, I'm reading this from the original. You can't see this because I didn't give Richard an image because I can't trust him with it. But if I make mistakes, it's not because it's not the best handwriting.
No, it's right.
It's pretty bad. Yeah. They're so tired of not being able to hear you that they cranked it up to 1,000.
Yeah. Turn it up to 11.
Yeah, the next time you talk into it, everyone goes deaf.
Yeah, turn up to 11 is a Spinal Tap joke of a movie that you should not have watched.
I don't know what he's talking about, so that feels good.
There you go. There's the difference.
Joseph was seen talking with him by the roadside. A stranger. When the company came up, there was no person with him. When at camp that night, Heber C. Kimball, asked the prophet, "Who was that man?" Joseph replied, "It was the beloved disciple John, who was then on his way to the 10 tribes in the north." Now, so the question of, is there a way to verify that? Well, how would I, right? I mean, you could ask John. I mean, he's still around. Hopefully he's in attendance. So, John, were you ever, you could see if Joseph mentioned the same thing, but of course he probably didn't. And that doesn't demonstrate that it's not a true story either. I mean, think about every single thing that you do all day, every day, except for those of you that are influencers. Almost no one knows what you do all day, every day. And the fact that you don't write it down or that you don't tell somebody doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means you didn't write it down or you didn't tell somebody. Or maybe you did write it down, and it's like the first several years of our marriage where we lost all of our photos because of digital camera. Angie she's shaking her head back there angrily. First 3 years. See, I said 2, but she wanted to make sure that everyone knew I was wrong. And this is very much like our home life. The digital camera, it was very early with digital cameras, and it all got corrupted. We lost all of it. right? And, I'd like to think that those were the best years of our marriage that she could look back on, but now she can't. Yeah. So if there's ever a problem, it's because of that. So there's always a problem of trying to make an argument from the absence of evidence. You can certainly say, well, we don't have another source that where Joseph ever tells anyone, hey, I saw John the Beloved on my way to Zion's camp. We also don't know whether or not Joseph would tell that story. We know that Joseph has had multiple spiritual experiences that he doesn't tell anybody about. We know that from his letter that he writes to the church in 1842, which later becomes Doctrine and Covenants, section 128. He's mentioning all kinds of manifestations that we have no record of anywhere in the church, where Joseph's like, oh yes, just like the angel Raphael. Oh yeah, we know all about that, Joseph. Why don't you care to elaborate? No idea. We have no idea. We have all kinds of people who speculate, but Joseph doesn't ever explain that experience. Talking about how when the devil appeared as an angel of light and Michael, the archangel, had to come and detect him. Where's that story in the history of the church? It's not. What does that mean? It means that if Joseph had written that letter and it never got published in the Times and Seasons, never became part of D&C 128, someone somewhere, years and years and years from now, might find it and say, someone saying, oh, hey, Joseph told us that one time Michael appeared to him, and someone, a cynical, historian like myself, might say, that never happened, obviously. Right? If that would have happened, Joseph would have told us that it happened. So you do need to be a little bit careful about how definitively you dismiss something when you only have a single source. Just like I want you to be careful about, deciding that you know exactly when the second coming is going to happen based upon another one, right? I mean, we need to be careful with sources. Sources should be looked at as possible in some cases rather than definitive. But at the same time, we also shouldn't throw them out simply because we don't have. This is the most boring thing I've ever said, isn't it?
North Carolina is coming back. They're only down 6. They're giving the Wolfpack a run for their money.
I'll look over at Richard sometimes during the recording, and he's just like, I'm not even enjoying this. And I'm the one making you do this, and I hate it.
So it is a very important point. I'm glad you brought up the reason why. It matters on the good stuff, where Gerrit's a dream crusher, and it matters on the stuff that is antagonistic of the church, when somebody is saying that, that Martin Harris said that he never actually saw the plates, only with his spiritual eyes. Okay, well, good estimates.
So we got to find out what kind of a source is that. How does that comport with other sources? And a lot of times all you have is a single source, and you have to treat it with care. It's not just that way for church history. It's that way for all history. There's all kinds of history where people have arguments about them right now because we only have a single source for it. And so people argue, well, were they really meaning what they said with that? And there's no way to verify it. And so you have to take things as they are. So let's get on to the Three Nephites, though, right? Because he doesn't just stop with John the Beloved. He's going to tell an even better story. The matter relating to the Three Nephites was this. The morning that the army of Governor Boggs, he's leaving out several words here, of the exterminating order, attempted to come into far west, Joseph the prophet stood with the brethren behind the breastwork so hastily thrown up in the middle of the night, and remarked, as they were sweeping, so he's talking about the movement as they're moving towards the breastworks, as they were sweeping and swarming towards the beloved city, that if they came beyond a certain place, we would open fire on them. The army came on near to that spot designated, and on a sudden they all turned and ran and pell-mell back to their camp in great fright, declaring that they saw too many thousands of soldiers to think of attacking the city. Joseph told brother James Bird that he saw between them and the mob one of the Three Nephites with a drawn sword before he made the remark about opening fire upon them, and that when the mob had turned, he saw the Three Nephites near that same place armed for battle. The hosts that the three had with them were undoubtedly exposed by the power of God to the view of the mob, being the hosts of soldiers they saw and fled from them. That's kind of a cool story, right? Now, again, I don't know whether or not that happened. Look at where we're at. It's Addison Everett is telling Oliver Huntington in a letter saying that I heard from Brother Bird who told me 40 years earlier that this happened. So essentially every testimony meeting you've ever been to. Barry wants me to stop recording. I don't want that going out. I'm trying to get people back to church. Again, that doesn't mean that didn't happen. Now, look, there are some things we can verify from this. Did the army open fire and charge in and assault Far West? They didn't. Is the reason why they didn't that? I mean, it's certainly possible. One could certainly argue that there was some miraculous help that saved the saints in Far West and that they didn't suffer the same horrific treatment that happened in Hans Mill. So is it possible? Sure. Would I base my entire testimony of the gospel on whether or not the three Nephites were there? Well, probably we shouldn't base literally any part of our testimony on whether or not the three Nephites were there. Okay, that if your testimony is dangling with the sword of Damocles thread on whether or not the three Nephite sighting happened, let's tone it down. Let's come back to Jesus and just, remember the Savior. So there's a story for you. I'm sure that's not what Wendy wanted to hear, but since, she likes National Treasure, she could watch that again.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so this next question comes to us. We had several questions about 116 pages. Did Joseph ever talk about what he learned from the 116 pages, other than what was in the book of, or that it was the book of Lehi? I'm looking for, there's a quote about Erastus Snow, 1882, about the 116 pages, and Ishmael's family marrying some of the folks. I'm not reading. I'm trying to just get to it.
I feel longer. Yeah, you're just
this is written better. Anyway, Gerrit, 116 pages. Go ahead.
Whoever sent that question in is going to be like,
we have two people.
Richard made me sound like an idiot.
No. It's I'm looking at the time, and we're about to make fun of bishops in a second, so we just want to get to it as soon as we can. No, I'm just kidding. My former bishop's right there.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Bishop England, who also went on a tour with us.
He did?
Yeah. And how horrible was it?
Terrible.
Yeah, see? That's why he does our marketing.
Yes, he's recently retired.
Well, forced retirement.
Yeah.
So the question on 116 pages is one that's been around for a really long time. We've covered a little bit of that, the loss of the pages. We'll talk more about it, especially next year as we talk about Doctrine and Covenants section 3 and section 5 and section 10 that are related to it. But it really is one of those great questions. And there's all kinds of people who want to tell you what they know was on it. And because it's something we don't know, it's always the most fascinating thing to us. It's an interesting thing about being a Latter-day Saint. We are just voracious with knowledge. We want to know more and more and more about God and the Lord's plan for us. And we want more give me more deep doctrine. You pour it on me, deep doctrine. I want it all. And we just and yet sometimes in that attempt to try to get to the deep doctrine, there's not a whole lot of substance that supports the position that we want to have. Now, that's okay, because God hasn't revealed everything to us. It's okay to say God hasn't. We literally have an article of faith that says God is going to yet reveal more things to us. If that's true, then there's 100% true things that we have no idea about right now, that we don't know, because God hasn't revealed. And you can't expect people to know revealed knowledge before it's revealed, right? So, look, if there's anyone who would be excited about the discovery of the 116 pages, you're looking at him. And it's not Richard.
It's not.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Sure. I feel like it's just,
If we actually had the 116 pages, I can't even describe it. My reaction would be, you think it was good to get the Kirtland Temple? I would lose my mind. I'd do another one of these.
You know what? That's right. That's right.
But so because we all know the story, because we so much. I can't speak for everybody in the room, but my life has been fundamentally altered for the rest of my life because the Book of Mormon's true. Of course, if there was the possibility, not even just as a historian, just to read whatever Mormon had in his commentary there, it would be so incredible. So I have that same urge and desire that I wish I had it. I wish I knew it. I want it, And so that can kind of cause us to be speculative about, well, what do you think was on it? Well, first of all, the Lord is the one who gives us the best explanation of what was on it, because he tells us in Doctrine and Covenants section 10 why he's using the small plates of Nephi to fill in for the lost 116 pages, because there's similar things on it. Sometimes when people are speculating about what was on the 116 pages, they'll take any piece of knowledge that seems like Joseph could have only gotten from the plates, but that aren't in.
Leave it in.
My mom's an English teacher.
By the way,
I'm
so glad you guys came back, by the way. I got very nervous. I'm like, oh no. I've said something. I've offended them. They've left.
No, they got up when you said the North Carolina score.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, you're checking.
You said the North Carolina score, and they got it. It was quick, too. It was like
your second half bet in.
Yeah,
I think North Carolina.
They're still taking props for the late second half.
Yeah.
So now I wonder why we have tangents, but we often tend to guess, and we'll say, well, Joseph said this about the Nephites. That's not anywhere in the Book of Mormon, so therefore that proves it was from the 116 pages. Now look, that's a fine conclusion. It makes sense. As a historian, I could say it's possible that Joseph learned this from the 116 pages. But that's not the same thing as being definitive about it, right? I think some people are definitive about it. Well, it must have come from this. I know that it came from this. When you don't have Joseph saying, oh yeah, it actually came from this, okay? So I'm always a little hesitant. And part of the reason why I am, let me give you a good example. We don't have any images for this because, again, I don't trust Richard. As a friend, it's not even about this podcast anymore. He's over here texting in his bets for the second half.
So North Carolina was a 10.5-point favorite going into the game.
It's good to know. So
the reason that there's a half point is so what Vegas wants.
No.
Okay.
No. President Hinckley. President Hinckley.
Yeah. April conference address.
How do we know that the brother of Gerrit was named Mahonri Moryankimer? It's a pretty good question, right? I mean, well, so that's the type of thing that isn't in the Book of Mormon. And someone might, for instance, say, you know what? Maybe when Mormon was doing the first part of the Book of Lehi, he's like, don't worry, I'm going to tell you a lot more about Mahonri Moryankimer later, right? And so they're like, oh, that's how they got the knowledge of it. We first hear that terminology for the brother of Gerrit in a letter that Oliver Cowdery writes to the church. It's his letter 7, which is very important to people for other reasons. But in it, Oliver Cowdery gives us this information. He says, the Lord showed the brother of Gerrit, and then he put in parentheses, Moryankimer. Well, that's nowhere in the Book of Mormon, so you're thinking, okay, maybe there's something to that. Okay. where we get the full name from is from something called the juvenile instructor.
That's where I go to for all of my...
When you're not at the Atlantic Monthly.
When I'm on the Atlantic Monthly.
When you're not...
Or
when you're,
MGM Grand's Sportsbook.
Richard's... You can always find Richard
Juvenile
either...
Instructor.
The juvenile instructor... The juvenile instructor was a church publication.
Oh, very good. Yes.
The juvenile instructor was a church publication in the late 19th century and even into the early 20th century. And George Buchanan was the editor of it. And it has all kinds of great knowledge in it. There's some great stuff in it. Well, there's an article that's written by George Reynolds. Now, I promised everybody that we were going to talk about polygamy.
Now, we're going to talk about polygamy tonight, but for the litners at home, it'll be next week.
We'll never talk about it. George Reynolds is the person who actually goes up before the Supreme Court. His case is the case that goes up for the Edmunds Act, the Reynolds case, which eventually gets decided against the Latter-day Saints. And so George Reynolds is one of the he's actually the secretary to the First Presidency.
We could have only seen that coming. Who would have guessed that we would have lost?
It's surprising that in a country that was thoroughly anti-Mormon, that there were anti-Mormon judgments made at federal levels. But so George Reynolds writes an article where he's talking about, the article's about the Gerrites. And he starts off this article. Among the builders of the Tower of Babel were two brothers named respectively Gerrit and Mahanrai Moryankimer. Okay. Well, he has a little star next to it, a little footnoted star, and you drop down in the footnote and you see, well, if I could get it to drop down, it's never going to drop down, Richard.
It's not.
It won't drop down.
Just make it up. They'll never know.
So like every other podcast?
Just say
no,
it.
I totally have a source on that. It's
oh, look, it's just dropped down.
It's like a super good one. It's one of my favorite sources. Here it is. So you go down to the footnote. It says, while residing in Kirtland, Elder Reynolds Cahoon had a son born to him. One day when President Joseph Smith was passing the door, he called the prophet in and asked him to bless and name the baby. So Joseph's like, you think giving a name and a blessing today is a little bit, Joseph's giving the child the name, right? Not, hey, what's his middle name? Okay. And the name is, no. Here's his name, okay? And after asking Joseph to do that, Joseph did so and gave the boy the name Mahanrai Moryankimer.
Fortunately, it was a family.
This is why you don't ever ask the bishop to name your child, right? Because you don't know. He gave him the name of Mahanrai Moryankimer. When he finished the blessing, he laid the child on the bed, and turning to Elder Cahoon, he said, it's Cahoon, but anyway, he said, the name I have given your son is the name of the brother of Gerrit. The Lord has just shown or revealed it to me. Elder William Cahoon, who was standing near, heard the prophet make this statement to his father, and this was the first time that the name of the brother of Gerrit was known in the church in this dispensation. So here's an example of something that someone might say, hey, I bet this came from something that's lost. Except that we have, at least the Cahoon saying that actually this was a revelation that Joseph received as he was blessing this child. So that's why it's tough to be definitive about what was in it, because Joseph is, for instance, Lucy Mack Smith tells us that Joseph is at night, before he's translating the plates, but after he's had his lots of visitations with Moroni because, things aren't working out so well, telling them all about the Nephite civilization. So Joseph's clearly getting some information from the angel Moroni. Whether or not that was in the lost 116 pages, I don't know. But that's part of the reason why when you're talking about a prophet of God who's receiving this constant stream of revelation, trying to parcel out what he says as, he said walls, there's no way. No, that's from the 116 pages. That he kind of has all kinds of stuff that's coming directly from God. And so I think it's important to know where our sources are when it comes to that. And people speculate. It's fine for people to speculate. I hope when they do, they let people know whether or not their source is a great source or not. I mean, even the Erastus Snow one that we were talking about, that one actually doesn't specifically say that Joseph got this information from the 116 pages. It's implied, and so maybe it is. But it's not specific to the point that's being made usually.
So we have one more question, and then we're going to take a break. We're going to have some giveaways and do some fun things. We've got
something way more fun than this.
Yeah, so we know that some of you, the chairs are a little softer than others, so we're going to take a little bit of a break here after one more question. So
it's a very nice way of saying we have hard chairs.
Yeah, well, so in about 45 to 50 minutes, we're going to have a break. So this one comes to us from Beth, or Ruth. Sorry, not even close.
You're making up names? I make up sources. You make up names.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question about the history of unpaid ministry in the church. I understand its need when the church was just fledgling, struggling organization with no money. But now that the church is prosperous, why not have paid ministry, where bishops are qualified professionals with expertise in human relations, conflict resolution, doctrine, and counseling therapy? And with this, they would have ample time to shepherd the flock, so to speak, as well as perform their personal family duties. They wouldn't need to have full-time jobs other than their jobs as bishops. So that's the general question. It's an interesting question. One of the things I was just texting my former bishop. Fortunately, no one's ever had a boss that is a bad boss because they're paid. But that's never happened to anyone. But it's an interesting question. But for me, the best bishops I've had have been, a control engineer, an auto mechanic, or my current bishop is a loan officer. He's great. I love him.
At loans.
Yeah. He's great at loans. He's currently my loan officer. Look, I know interest rates are around 7%, but if you're looking to buy a house and want to pay $6,000 a month, he's your guy.
Yeah.
It's not his fault what rates are, but he's do a good job. Anyway, but the point is that these are men that are just the most normal, average men that are endowed with power from God and can do incredible things. And so Gerrit's got some interesting numbers and stats here, but I feel like the question is one that it makes some assumptions that I do not believe to be necessarily fair on other paid clergy.
Well, so I mean, look, my first thought is that this was probably sent in by someone whose husband's currently a bishop. Like, why do we not have professional clergy?
Yeah,
this is ridiculous. Or at the very least, maybe we could. It's a great question because honestly, there certainly are some things that we as Latter-day Saints we kind of take for granted. That's the way things are, because we've been to testimony meeting. That we say, it's not weird to us, but it might be to other people. In fact, she referenced in the other part of her email that, that for people from other faiths who come to our church, what if they come and someone gives a terrible sacrament meeting talk? I'm like, what were you doing there the same Sunday I was speaking? But, the idea behind it is we could have things more professionalized if we had a paid ministry. So one way that I would first of all say I've thought about that same thing, right? And so I appreciate her question in the sense that there's certainly the case that if you had someone it was their job, who went to school and got a doctorate or at least a master's of divinity, who understood the various different types of languages, that you might have a more baseline of education. I mean, pastors who go to school are trained in in counseling. They don't just, have to pick it up on the fly or go through whatever training the church provides. And so you could see why someone might have that impetus. So it makes sense, right? At the same time, I think there's a little bit of holy envy that goes on when we look at people who have a professional pastor and we say, man, I wish I had that. Because if I did, I'd never have another boring sermon. There'd be way better counseling that I would get when it came to things in my marriage, things would just work much more fluently. The reality, based on statistics, doesn't really bear that out. In fact, in a Pew survey of Christians, asking them, how often do you get a very good sermon from your pastor? It was like 46% said that they very often get one. Most of the time they don't, right? And then on the other topics that were brought up, what about counseling? What about spending more time? They found that in the survey, Christians don't want to counsel with their pastor about their marriage or about their children. What they want is to talk about religion. And so I think there's a little bit of understanding that there are some amazing pastors devoted to God who are outstanding at preaching the gospel. And then there's some that aren't. And because this ministry, the profession of being a professional clergy, is rapidly shrinking, the number of people that are going into it, not only is Christianity in America and Europe losing its numbers, the people willing to become a preacher is rapidly shrinking as well. To the point where in the last like 15 years, the average age of a Christian pastor in America has gone up 10 years. Your pastor in America is their average age. Their average age?
Their average age. Yeah.
Their average age.
It's 10 years greater than it was last year.
It is now 50.
Yeah, I agree.
Is that
a troubling stat, guys?
Why are we clapping for their age going up?
You guys get the show. That's great.
Their average age is now 54. What does that mean if the average age of pastors is 54? It means you have very, very few young pastors, is what it means. And as your pastors age, then what does that mean? It means that churches are now desperate to get pastors. If you read, outside of the Atlantic Monthly, if you read Christianity Today or these other journals from other religions, you'll notice a recurring theme ongoing is, we need more pastors and we need them yesterday. There's a crisis. Why can't we get more people to become pastors? So what does it mean when you're in a profession where people are desperate to get anyone to do it? My mom, what did you say there, Mom?
It's like school teachers.
Okay, first of all, she said that. I want everyone in the room to know.
So she said it's like school teachers.
Okay, yeah.
For those listening.
Yeah, I did not say that. I want my record clear. Renee Dirkmott, who lives in Salem, Utah, said. Now look, Becky's a teacher. Richard's wife's a teacher. My mom was a teacher. Obviously, I'm a teacher, and all of us who are teachers know that there are amazing teachers, people that, frankly, you're around them when they're interacting with kids, and you're like, not only are you good at this, I don't think I've ever met anyone better at this. And yet, here's your $20,000 a year check. You know what I mean? Like, it's incredible the skills that some people have. At the same time, every teacher that you know would tell you that they know at least one teacher who is a dumpster fire, who is terrible. There's a teacher at your school who's the reason why you have all of the trainings you have. And everybody knows who it is. Like, well, it's because of him again. All right, that's right. He should have got this last month when we trained on the same thing. And so why isn't that teacher fired? Because the desperation to get teacher is so great that you have to cast a really wide net. And what does that mean? You're going to have some amazing fish in that net. You are also going to have a few tin cans and probably one of Bishop England's old socks.
Get what you pay for.
You get what you pay for. So that is to say that actually what you find is there's a growing level of distrust of clergy among Christians, feeling like that their pastor is less and less qualified. Because instead of, it used to be a competition. It used to be, there's 5 people getting their doctorate of divinity, only one of them's going to get a pastorate. The others are just going to have to go figure something else out. Now there's 5 people getting it and 10 churches saying, we all need you to be our pastor. So the worst one of them, the one who barely graduated, the one who used AI, chat GPT on everything, he's a pastor, right? The one who's amazing, also a pastor. And so I think it's a little bit of holy envy to say, oh, if only I was a Lutheran, I'd always have a pastor who's amazing. You only have to talk to a few Lutherans who will say, I will counter that argument, right? And so, but really the main reason, and this is probably a good place to finish because we should have been done a long time ago.
Yes.
Yeah. The real reason why we don't have a paid clergy isn't because we've gamed it out and we've decided, you know what, I like the fact that my plumber is the one who's now the bishop of the ward. I like how God mixes it up and gives experience. It's because this is not a country club. This isn't some political organization where, we sat down and we created the rules. We're like, you know what? What if we just had it be unpaid? What if we ruined someone's life every once in a while and said, for 5 years, your life's over? Oh, you know what? And if that's bad enough, we'll give it to him for 10, and make him a stake presidency member. But it's because it's the Lord's church. The real answer to the question, and I don't mean to be trite, is why is it that we don't have a paid ministry? It's because that is the church that Jesus Christ set up. Jesus, for whatever the reason is, whether it's because of the insight we get from people from all different backgrounds, whether it's because the Lord doesn't want people to be going into it as a profession, because the Lord wants to be able to call the person who can bring you closest to Jesus, whether or not they have a doctorate of divinity, whatever the reason is. The reason why we don't have a paid clergy is because the Lord Jesus Christ set up the church with an unpaid clergy. And I think it's important to remember, when we sit back and we think about why is our church this way? Why is our church... The biggest answer to some of those questions are it's this way because this is the way the Lord decided to set it up. I have had incredible men serve as bishops in my life who've really touched my life. I've also, had bishops that were fine. They did a good job. They worked hard. They put in a lot of effort, but I didn't feel like they impacted me that much. There are others that I'm eternally grateful for. And I think all of us have that experience. And it's actually not that much different than the experience your average Lutheran or Presbyterian is having with their pastors. There's a reason why people call it pastor roulette, where they just keep going to a church until they get one that they like. That's a very common thing among Christians. And so, I, for one, am grateful for the men and women who serve in these unpaid callings. My wife was a Relief Society president. It was the worst time of my life. And she's always trying to serve people, and it was very frustrating. I've got a needs assessment for you right here. We get our own dinner. She was obviously great, but it really is one of the great parts of our church that to be a member of it is to see everybody just trying to build the kingdom of Zion, the kingdom of God, the city of Zion together. And that's where we're all trying to get to. And so, yeah, maybe my bishop isn't, a student of ancient Greek. But maybe he can teach me something about forgiveness that I wouldn't learn otherwise. Maybe my Relief Society president isn't also the CEO of a corporation, but maybe she can teach me about service and teach me how to have a testimony that doesn't rely on the world. And so I think that for me, the beauty of the way the church is set up is we have all of these abilities to interact with other people who just might touch our spirits. So thank you so much for joining us.
We are going to, for here, the studio audience, we're going to do kind of a more traditional episode in the next one where there's one or two questions, but then Gerrit kind of dives a little bit deeper into a specific. We're going to talk about polygamy. We're going to talk about politics. So that's happening. We're very exciting. It's very exciting. And that's what you paid the $13.50 for. So we're going to do that. We're very excited. We're going to take a little bit of a break. And for those that aren't here, you'll get it next week.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.